in today's webinar, we are learning about AI governance and ensuring fair and compliant recruitment. To lead us into this learning, it's my pleasure to welcome first-time guest speaker on the program, Guru Sethupathy, CEO and co-founder of FairNow. I had the pleasure of meeting Guru at a conference recently. I was intrigued by his presentation, and I asked him during that event if he would come and join us at the RPOA to share the information to our audience. So it's my pleasure to pass the baton and welcome Guru to tell us about himself and share his presentation.
Excellent. Lamise, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, Lamise, very nice to see you again. Thanks for having me on today. And yeah, very much look forward to sharing on this topic. I know this is becoming a more and more important topic for a lot of organizations who are both seeking and trying to figure out how to use AI in their HR organization, in their hiring process, in their recruiting process. But also, I'm imagining many also have concerns or questions around not just how to use it and where to use it, but what are the risks that they should be thinking about and how do they mitigate those risks? And those are the topics we're going to cover in this conversation. So I hope your audience finds this useful. So just as a quick intro, FairNow is a technology company, and we're on a mission to help organizations build compliance and trust in their artificial intelligence. So whether you're an HR technology vendor who is building tools and technology in the HR space and using AI in your tools and technology, and you want to make sure you're compliant and building trust with your customers, or you're an HR organization that is buying things from vendors, buying technologies from vendors, and want to ensure that what you're doing is both having good outcomes from a talent perspective, but also compliant with laws and regulations, right? How do you ensure all of that? So as a quick background, I've been in the AI space for over 2 decades. The first decade of that was in academia, where I was both a computer scientist and an economist, and building AI technology, researching AI technology, but also trying to understand how AI technology, what were the social impacts? What was going to be the impact of AI on business, on work, on jobs, on skills? And then also, how are AI systems biased? And how does that bias compare to human biases, right? Humans are also biased. And so how do these things interact in the social world? The last dozen years, I've been in corporate America, first at McKinsey, again, continuing to lead AI services. And then most recently, I was an executive at Capital One. And at Capital One, I led their people analytics and technology function, where, among other things, our team used data analytics and AI to transform many aspects of the HR functions. Many things that you and your teams may be thinking about today, we built at Capital One over the last 7-8 years. And as part of that, because Capital One is in a regulated space, they're a bank, they're a financial services company, we had to be very, very, very thorough from a governance standpoint. And one thing I noticed is most other organizations were not being thorough from a governance standpoint. They were taking on a lot of risk and they didn't know it. And so that's why we started FairNow, to really help other organizations, especially in the HR space. And you'll see some data and some numbers that I'm about to present. But a lot of HR organizations are starting to use AI, especially through their vendor technologies, and don't know what that technology is doing. And that's a big risk to take on. And so we started FairNow to help companies govern these technologies, govern their own technologies, govern their vendor technologies, and do it in a very simple and efficient way. So let me start first. What is AI, right? This is a question, and I think everyone has a view. It's one of those things where everyone thinks they know what it is, but they don't know how to describe it. And I'll take a stab at it here. It's any technological system that takes data as inputs to basically learn and then makes predictions, recommendations, or content, right? So the content piece, that's what everyone is kind of familiar with these days. If you've worked with ChatGPT or Mistral or Claude or all of these, different, large language models, if you've interacted with them and these chatbots, they are producing content. But even classical statistical models that make predictions and recommendations, right? How many of you have interacted with Netflix and it says, hey, these are the shows we recommend for you? that is also AI, right? Because that is using the data of all of the users of Netflix, including your own, to then personalize a recommendation, right? Or if you have things like that, make predictions, right? In self-driving cars, there's a lot of different AI systems that are making predictions about what's going to happen. Or even algorithms that make predictions about whom to hire, which is more relevant for this audience. That is AI also. And that's been around for a long time. So I don't want you guys to think AI is only this new stuff. No, AI has been around for a while. And a lot of the laws and regulations, even though the laws and regulations seem new, they include those classical prediction models as part of the scope of these regulations. So you have to be really careful there, right? So again, any technological system that takes data and learns from that data to make predictions, recommendations, or content is an artificial intelligence system. And as you can see in the bottom, you have very simple systems that do very basic statistical modeling, all the way to what we see now are these complex chatbots, right? All of that is AI. Right? And the thing I want to start with, because of course we're going to talk about risk and governance, but before that, I want you guys to remember, like, the potential here is tremendous, right? This technology is already transforming and is going to transform our business and personal worlds like few technologies before, right? And it's already having that kind of impact. So at Capital One, my team, we built AI technology that was not only more efficient from a hiring standpoint, but led to better hires and was less biased than existing processes, right? So it hit the trifecta: efficiency, quality of hire, and more fair. And that's amazing. Who wouldn't want that kind of ROI, right? But to do that, we had to do a lot of governance. We had to do testing. We have to have the right processes in place, and so on and so forth. So you can achieve great outcomes if you mitigate the risks. And another piece of research that I like to talk about, this was more recent, but they put men and women into two random groups, right? Group A and Group B. Group A was told that they were going to apply to a job that involved humans throughout the process. So from a sourcing standpoint, from a communication standpoint, from an interview standpoint, from a selection standpoint, everything. Group B was told the entire process was going to be done by AI. Okay. More women self-selected to apply in job B. Okay. This is a pretty profound piece of research. One, it's a very high quality research because that's a randomized controlled trial. That's kind of gold standard for doing these kinds of studies. But second of all, the fact that women particularly chose to apply more for the job that they knew was entirely about AI tells you that there's a lot of perception among certain groups in the population that today's human systems, human ways of doing things, especially when it comes to talent management, hiring, and so on and so forth, are biased. And so they'd rather take their chance with an AI system. So that goes to show you that there's a lot of opportunity here, right? To improve candidate experience, to have a less biased process, to have a better quality of hire process, to get better talent, and to do it all more efficiently. There's a lot of possibilities. Yes.
If I may interrupt, just to clarify with your example, were people applying for AI job or was AI used in the hiring process? Can you clarify?
Yeah. No, it was not about an AI. The job was not about AI. So specifically, it was a random set of jobs. They were told you're either going to be interacting with humans through your interview process, okay, or you're going to be interacting with AI through the interview process. Okay, and women's picked them. They applied at a higher rate for the latter process. They preferred to interact with, to be interviewed by, to be selected by AI. Does that make sense?
Interesting. Yeah, that's why I thought I just wanted to clarify. Thank you.
Yeah. So really kind of fascinating stuff and really gives you insight on the potential, the value prop here from using AI. One more, I'll give an example. There's been some research that shows that using Gen AI increased the productivity of consultants at a consulting firm. This was done with BCG, right? And they were much more efficient, 12 to 25% more efficient. And what's fascinating is that while it benefited everyone, it benefited low performers even more, right? And if you think about consulting tasks, A lot of consulting tasks overlap with HR tasks, right? Doing research, pulling together a deck, coming up with recommendations, all of that stuff, right? And so if you can use AI well, you're going to be much, much, much more productive. And so that's a separate topic to think about in your own personal career. Like, how are you leveraging AI in your career growth? But as an HR leader, or if you're part of an HR organization, or if you're in HR technology, there's a huge productivity opportunity here to help the HR ecosystem become more efficient and the broader population. And so that's really fascinating research as well. Look, so the point is, I want to start off this conversation by just giving you examples of how the value proposition from using AI is so large, and why this is why companies are so excited, right? It's not based on nothing, because there's a lot of research that shows the efficiency gains, the efficacy gains, the experience gains are going to be tremendous, right? But at the same time, now let's flip to the risks, right? What are the challenges here? Well, AI can be biased. It can be used to create toxic content. We don't always know what exactly is happening in some of these AI systems. Some of them we do. Some of them we can understand what's going on. But some of the more complicated ones, we don't exactly know how they work. So that's a challenge if you need to understand why a particular decision was made. Some of these newer systems, they make up stuff. They hallucinate is the term, if you've heard that term, right? And we can talk through some examples of that. If the Air Canada one is a good example of that, if everyone knows about that. And then there's other kind of security challenges and data privacy challenges and so on and so forth. So these are all things that you should really think about in leveraging AI in your organization. Of course, this is kind of not news anymore, but investments in AI are expected to grow to trillions of dollars over the next decade. And hiring, and there's many, many, many different sectors and use cases that people are exploring right now, but HR is one of the big ones. And within HR, hiring is the biggest. And in fact, there's some data I have to show you. Hiring is the single biggest part of HR where AI is being used today, right? And you can see from this survey at SHRM that was done last year, what are all the different parts of the hiring process where AI is being used. Anything from interviewing and selecting and scoring candidates to resume scoring, all the way to creating content, right? Creating job descriptions, interacting with candidates, and so on and so forth, right? So there's so many aspects that can be automated, that can be improved, so on and so forth by using AI, right? And you see organizations are already doing that today. But here's the challenge, right? So even as the adoption of AI is now, more than half of large companies are already using AI in their HR organizations. That being said, they don't know what it's doing. Most CHROs don't know if it's institutionalizing bias. Most organizations don't have the resources to monitor these systems, especially since most of them are bought, right? HR organizations don't have huge data science teams to build these themselves, so they often buy it from vendors. And so they buy these technologies and they don't know what exactly these tools are working or how they're working, or is there even AI in the system? So they'll buy a technology package or a solution. Is there even AI in the system? And companies will, especially vendors, they want to say, we have AI, we have AI. Well, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, right? And they claim they have AI, right? Do you, as a purchaser of this tool, understand how the technology works? Do you understand if it is AI? Do you understand if it is in scope for laws and regulations? Do you understand if that vendor has performed audits on its data, training data, and its model? Right? You have to ask these questions, and those questions are not being asked today, though I think that is slowly starting to change. And it is also starting to lead to a bit of confusion in the sales cycle. And vendors are trying to figure out how to solve that.
Guru, can I also add, you mentioned you're buying technology and you might not know what it's doing, or you might not know if it has AI. Not to mention that you buy a technology and then it's adding AI. I'm noticing a lot of technologies just adding that AI component and just sneaking in. Could be in beta trial without asking customers.
That's
right?
right. So, that's right. Yeah. That's very dangerous, right? And you have to know that. In fact, we have something I can share with you and you can share with your audience, is we have a vendor questionnaire. And we are educated. We're trying to educate HR organizations on, hey, you need to be asking these questions in your RFP or in your procurement process. And if the vendor is not willing to share this information, you should move on, right? This is very serious stuff, and it actually segues very nicely into this slide, where there's been a doubling of employment discrimination lawsuits over the last decade or two, right? It's gone up, and in many of the regulations that are coming down, HR is considered a high-risk domain use case for AI. Right, so this is you have to be compliant with these laws and regulations, and you can see there's a lot of lawsuits that are happening now. Workday was sued recently, Aon was sued recently, Goldman just had to pay a huge gender bias lawsuit, and then you have all these regulations on top of that. And one of the things most people don't know is they keep saying, okay, what's going on with the AI laws and regulations? Here's the thing, and Keith Sonderling, he's the head of the EEOC. He's actually a neighbor of mine in McLean, Virginia. And we chat often about this stuff. And he says, he has a great point, right? He says, look, you don't even have to wait for these laws. You are already taking on risk. Even if none of these laws passed, if they never pass, you still need to be compliant. And why is that? Because Chapter 7 of the Civil Rights Act says specifically, and we're all familiar with this, that your hiring process cannot discriminate on the basis of blah 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 protected classes and so on and so forth. It doesn't say only if you have human recruiters. It doesn't say only if you have human interviewers. It's regardless. It doesn't matter if you use humans, AI, machines, technology, data. It doesn't matter. You cannot discriminate. And so some of these lawsuits that are coming out are not even based on the new regulations. They're based on the existing law as it stands in the, and as the way that the EEOC interprets it. So if you're using technology, you don't need to wait for these regulations to start monitoring them. You should do it now. That being said, the regulations are coming, and you can see that on this page. The number of regulations has just blown up in the last year. Right? So you have a bunch of laws at the top of the page that are already in effect about the use of AI. Some of them are HR specific, like the New York City Local Law 144, which you may be familiar with. But even the ones, and so the Maryland and Illinois laws are also specific in the context of hiring. But the Colorado law and the Utah law, for instance, or the EU AI Act and the Colorado law on the second line, these are all much more broader laws. But what's fascinating about them is they all talk about risk of, different levels of risk, low risk, medium risk, high risk, and hiring is considered high risk in almost all of these laws. And so even though they're much broader, they all call out hiring. They call out some other things too. They call out lending and banking and healthcare, right? All of these are very important, right? You're talking about people's careers, their finances, their health. So all of these are very high risk domains for the use of AI. And so all of these require governance, right? Bias testing, but more than that, they require other types of governance, which we'll talk about if you're using AI. The other thing I'll say is, and this is really important, some themes emerging from these laws is that both the enterprise customer and the vendor are in scope for most of these laws. There's a few exceptions, but that is the trend we're starting to see. Both sides are in scope, right? So the customer cannot just blame it on the vendor, and the vendor cannot just blame it on the customer, right? Both sides need to demonstrate testing and governance and audits, right? So keep that in mind. As I mentioned, this is something I said, the law is already on the books. Even though these new regulations are coming, there's already laws on the books that you need to be compliant with. In addition to that, so you have these regulatory frameworks coming out, state by state, country by country, et cetera. On top of that, you're going to have standards, right? Market standards. You may be familiar with ISO standards that have been around for a long time across many, many industries. Well, ISO has now put out standards for certification of responsible AI. So if you're a vendor, right, I don't think it's going to be too far away where you're going to have to certify yourself as ISO certified to be able to sell to your customers, or to be able to say you're NIST certified, right? So that's how these things are going to come in to scope. And vendors and technology providers are going to want to demonstrate that they're certified to be able to sell in the market.
Guru, before you move away from regulation, a comment in the chat from Bob, and his point is neither the size of the organization nor the hiring volume matters for these regulations to apply.
No.
Is that correct?
No, it doesn't say anything about that. Doesn't say anything about that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. If you are using AI, it doesn't matter. Yep. Okay. some trends that we're starting to see and hear from customers, right? One is, hey, this stuff is confusing. Like I have these models, I have these AI applications. There's 15 different laws. Which ones are in scope for which models? Help me figure this out, right? So that's one thing we're hearing. Second, enterprise customers are slowly starting to ask vendors questions around, hey, you got to start answering questions. You got to tell us, is your model biased? Is it compliant with these laws and regulations? Do you have any policies from a governance standpoint? How do you deal with remediation? How do you deal with bad data? They're starting to ask these questions, right? And so now there's starting to be some expectations that AI governance and compliance will be part of a sales cycle, right? And so Gartner expects that most HR organizations by next year will have invested in some kind of AI framework, AI council, AI governance council, and really have a bit of a practice, a bit of a program around governance, right? And so what does good governance look like, right? To me, it's 6 pillars. I have 5 on this page, and I'll talk about one more. But the first pillar is if you're, again, whether you're a vendor or whether you're a customer, all of these matter. First, inventory all of your AI applications. When I talk to leaders in HR organizations and I say, hey, how many AI applications do you use? I have not had one executive say the right answer. You got to know this, guys, right? Like this is the first part of risk management and governance. So you got to know how many applications you have and what's the risk level. Not all applications are high risk. So I don't want to scare you into thinking, oh my God, you're going to have so many high risk applications. Not all applications are high risk. Maybe a fraction of them are high risk. Maybe some of them are low risk, but you won't know that until you inventory them and do a risk assessment. So that's number one. Number two, an important part of good governance is having humans in the loop. If you've heard of that phrase, what does humans in the loop mean? That means having roles and accountability for humans, right? Who's building these models? Who's approving these models? Who's testing these models? Who's making the final decision when it comes to hiring? Is it the AI that makes the final decision, or does the person make a final decision, right? There's key points along the chain where human judgment and decision-making comes into play. So you need to establish those roles and responsibilities. If you have a council, do you have a council that includes data scientists, legal and risk, someone from the business, an HR executive, right? Are you getting the right perspectives and the right roles and responsibilities? Policies. Do you have a policy around transparency? Like if you are using AI to hire people, do you let candidates know that? Are you transparent with them? Right? If so, how much transparency do you give? These are types of policy you're going to want to have to build trust, right? If something goes wrong and in one of your tests, you realize the AI was biased or did something that it wasn't supposed to, what is your remediation plan? Do you stop? Do you turn it off for all your customers? Do you have some other thing that you do? Customers are going to want to know that, right? Compliance, which we've talked about, and testing. You're going to want to test it. You're going to want to test it for bias, for performance, for a variety of things, for data privacy, so on and so forth, right? And then the last piece, which is not on this page, is training. You're going to want to train your HR organization around these risks and how to ensure that people are using AI correctly in compliance, right? So these are the pillars of good governance. And that's what we do at FairNow, right? We help companies execute a governance program on our platform, right? We help you ensure that you're compliant with laws and regulations. We help you institute that kind of governance program, and we can test your models for bias, right? We can ensure, and whether you're using a vendor model, we can test that for bias, or if you have your own models, we can test that for bias, right? And so we help you basically figure out how to build a governance program and simplify and automate it, a lot of it for you, right? So thank you very much. I know we're coming up on time and I wanted to make sure we had a few minutes for questions. So happy to open it up, Lamise, for questions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I welcome the audience to ask questions while they think of any questions I might have.
Yes,
your previous slide on how FairNow helps customers. So you mentioned that you built a lot of these at Capital One, and that is a huge organization with a lot of resources. Not many RPO or recruiting providers have these kind of resources. Does a solution like FairNow provide competitive edge or an applicable solution, sizable solution for all kind of businesses?
In fact, that's why I think that's a huge part of our value proposition, Lenise, is the fact that, yeah, most organizations are small. They're not going to have the resources to build a huge governance program and to be able to maintain it, right? And so our technology simplifies it for you, right? So you don't need to hire 4 or 5 people to go run your governance program and do all these things, right? You can do it on our technology, on our platform, right? So our platform is a place where you can inventory your AI applications, so you know all the applications you have. It does an automatic risk assessment for you, right? It tracks all the laws and regulations for you, so you know exactly what you need to do to make sure you're compliant. It automatically does bias testing for you, right? If you had to do all of these things on your own, you'd have to hire a team, right? And most organizations can't do that. And so that's why we started FairNow to say, hey, look, you can't go hire a full team. You can use our platform and you can simplify this and do it a lot more cheaply. And now you have the benefit of, okay, now you have the comfort where you have governance on the platform, and boom, you can go invest in AI, you can buy more technology, you can go build more technology, you can go do all that.
Yeah. And I don't want to get into demo guru, because that's not the purpose of the call. We just want to keep it informational and educational to our audience. But what does an actual implementation of AI governance look like with a solution like FairNow? Is it a one-time setup and then you're on autopilot, or is it an ongoing process? Give us a sense of the timeline of execution.
Yeah, it's pretty quick, actually. That's the beauty of it, right? Like, we come in, we do an initial consultation, just understand, first of all, even help you understand what are the AI applications you have in your organization and what are the laws that are in scope and what needs to happen, right? And based on that, if there's a lot, then we help you onboard onto the full platform and get you going on everything. And if it's just a little, we say, hey, look, you don't need this other stuff. Maybe all you need to do is a bias audit, or maybe all you need to do is a risk assessment or whatever, right? So whatever is the right kind of solution, then we just kind of onboard you onto that part of the platform. And again, all of that can happen in a matter of a few weeks.
Very good. So a question from Bob. He's curious if Guru is aware of any organizations which are incorporating AI governance and fairness into onboarding and annual compliance training, or is that too early?
Can you repeat the question? Are any organizations implying it into onboarding? What does he mean by onboarding?
New hire onboarding. So are they using AI governance for online onboarding?
No, I don't think so. I think now look, it depends on the job, right? So there are certain jobs. So if you're like an average HR associate, definitely not, right? But if there's a person that's been hired for building AI technologies into a company that's in a regulated space, I wouldn't be surprised. So for instance, at Capital One, I'm sure there are certain roles, data science roles and other types of roles where, yes, that's part of someone's training when they first come in, but it's still pretty early for that.
And I want to share with the audience that Guru wrote an excellent article related to what we talked about and best practices for AI governance. So I'm going to share this with the participants here today, and we'll have it also. It's on the RPOA website, so it's around AI governance. So at the RPOA, we're planning to continue the conversation on AI governance, specifically for recruiting. It's such an important topic for our membership, and we're doing this in programs like this webinar program and other member-only events, as well as our annual conference. So expect to continue to hear from the RPOA. We see the association as a platform to continue educating our members on technology for recruiting in general, but AI as being a hot topic recently.
Yeah, Luis, thank you again for having me. A couple last things I'll say very quickly. I'll share with you our vendor questionnaire. So any of you, and you can share that with this audience. And then if anyone has any follow-up questions, wants to learn more about this topic, or wants to learn more about AI, FairNow, my email is on this page, and you can feel free to reach out.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. It's been very informative, and I want to thank our audience. A few upcoming events, you can find them on the RPOA website. We have our webinar for August already announced on diversity, neurodiversity in hiring. So we'll continue that conversation and hope to see you in a future RPOA event.